25 years have passed since the notable disappearance of Dr. Roman Vishniac. We are pleased on this silver anniversary to present a concise compendium of Vishniac's life and collections, as revealed by the thorough evaluative exploration of Vishniac's homes and holdings. Much has been written on the strange and multi-talented Dr. Roman Vishniac, most of all by the man himself. An art historian, photographer, and biologist by training, a child of the First World War, a witness and survivor of the Second, a professor of the humanities and microsciences, a friend of Einstein and Chagall, Dr. Roman Vishniac was both shrouded in and a fount of rich myth and history. In the following presentation of selected findings, we seek to reconstruct the man as he has never been reconstructed before from his things and previously unknown creations. Professor Jakob Kassel is the foremost scholar of Vishniacian literature and collections. He's the chairperson of the Dr. Roman Vishniac Initiative at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn and privy to the deepest corners of each Vishniac site around the world. Professor Clara Vishniac-Konbalotis is a fledgling archivist and Vishniac's last remaining heir. In a collaborative project, we've navigated sites and archives in Russia, Poland, Spain, Germany, and New York, as well as the delocalized International Tracing Service archives housed in Bad Arolsen, ever in the process of digitization. The sheer amount of unpatented technologies and media that we have discovered upon navigating each site would thrill both the novice engineer and the experienced illusionist. Vishniac was a savant of rendering. If ever there were magic, it lives in the collections of our Dr. Roman Vishniac. In addition, unbeknownst to Kassel and Vishniac-Konbalotis, Dr. Roman Vishniac was a prolific poet. Haunted by the demons of his era, Vishniac wrote many unpublished books of what we are referring to, in jest of course, as mutant-free verse. We have included here excerpts from two of these collections, Under the Chromatin and Angelus Novus. We've also included, as a postscript, an excerpt of the singular libretto written by Dr. Roman Vishniac himself, entitled Under the Chromatin as well. Like any work of collaboration, this text has made a number of compromises to best fit the research interests, desires, and comfort levels of Jakob Kassel, Clara Vishniac-Konbalotis, and then Publishing House, of course. One of the key tensions that has arisen is that of temporality. While we seek to convey the inapplicability of a linear narrative to the resonant rendering of Dr. Roman Vishniac's life, the experiences of Vishniac and his collections as they moved across Europe, and in the case of his negatives, the Americas, Australia, and the Arctic, should be marked in this compendium. Thus, we approach temporality in the manner of punctuated equilibrium, cautiously nonlinear and punctuated with temporal landmarks. We've grouped the collections by archival site. The collections from which we draw include, but are not limited to, negatives, 25 and 120 millimeter, chromogenic prints, gelatin silver prints, ink on paper, inkjet prints, offset lithography and platinum, correspondences and maps, invented household utilities and talismans, suspect saxophones, under-the-desk nuclear missile shelters, insect preservatives and metamorphic enzymes, compact discs, unclassifiable miscellanea. It is our hope that, through the unwieldy presentation of these accumulating objects, images, and text from the collections of Dr. Roman Vishniac, you will look into the mirror and ultimately find a friend. November 9th, 2014, Brooklyn, New York. The forest, which she did not choose to enter, but traced along its edge. Trace, noun, verb, transitive, from the Middle English trace, action of drawing by which a drought beast like a Rolleiflex or kinetographic camera is harnessed, Italian trotto, a rope or string of onions, a tress or plait of hair, Old French tressier, 12th century Spanish trezar, Italian traziere, to follow by foot, to trace, Latin tractus, a drawing, dragging, trailing, crawling, a train, track, course, beginning with a cipher of solvent and particulate matter, a slime path, a footprint, trans, to twine, interweave, or braid, a set of chromosomal strands along the walls of an archive, also with up. The experimental metamorphosis of an axolotl, the representation of a man's life beginning with collapse, weaving retrograde through each successive collection of punctures. Chapter 1. The Disappearance of Dr. Roman Vishniak. As a child, I often envisioned my grandfather's disappearance in Kodachrome film, unfurling, crackling as white dots flickered against an imagined screen. It is a moment in history. The wall is fallen. The atlas laid across my grandfather's desk, colored in reds and blues, littered with round-headed pins and chess pieces, is now obsolete. In his study, my grandfather peers at a specimen of protozoa through a steel-plated microscope, humming to himself. He wears a long, white laboratory coat, which skims the tips of his slippers, and holds a pen behind each ear. He's the consummate scientist. Behind swaying velvet at the windows, the unreal city looms, etched in shadow. Men move past in an interminable shuffle. Do they know that the world is no longer halved? Their heads are lowered. If I were to pause the film, these men would form a shadowscape of hats and elbows. Their figures would suspend in autumnal fog like insects in amber. My grandfather leans back, resting his eyes. The Berlin Orchestra streams into the study through an antique transistor radio. Beethoven's Ninth in D minor. The fourth movement begins with a purred drum roll and bellowing cellos amid static. My grandfather's study is a menagerie of objects and inventions. The transistor radio rests on a mound of turtle shells and dismantled artillery, rigged into stability with a fishing net. A gem-encrusted pair of binoculars hangs from a hat rack. Tomes of invertebrate physiology sack in the shadow of a flatworm's husk. On a corner table, a plate of apple slices decomposes. A row of cameras perched on tripods clicks quietly, lighting the room with soft flashes. A screen beyond displays the fruits, unmoldering, reforming. And everywhere, photographs. Not the photographs that he has bound, packaged, and sold as the memoir of a forgotten land, no, but SLR stills of the Chilean sea base as it mates, negatives of enzymes captured mid-catalysis, unframed prints of my mother rendered pointillist through the eyes of a firefly. In my grandfather's study, technology is a storm. The strings and woodwinds converse in staccato. My grandfather pulls a hand mirror from the desk and contemplates his reflection. He thumbs the liver spots at his temples. The skin has fallen away from his eyes. Hello, old friend. Sometimes he forgets that he is no longer a boy, and as my grandfather looks into his own hazel eyes, he feels he's looking into the eyes of an ancestor. Mirrors were once instruments for summoning the dead. Is it you, Roman? The earth's mantle shifts beneath blacktop. Grazing land becomes a hospital, becomes a labor camp, becomes a technical school at which extractive metallurgy is developed. His cities glut with military, pock and split with shelling. My grandmother, my mother, and her brother leave. They're always leaving. The ground shakes, and yet all the while, the century does not blanch my grandfather's violet-flecked irises. The violins and cellos dig at the prelude, summoning the bassoons, and the flutes and the piccolos. Dots flicker at the screen like snowdrift. Outside, the unreal city moves in monochrome dusk. The cellos lead the symphony through each movement. Always the solemn, the dark, before the sweet, the winds, before the release, the maelstrom. My grandfather cradles his things with his gaze, a cinder block and a curl of twine, a scythe and a lacquered elephant ear. How can the phrenologist resist assessing his own nature when he runs his fingers through his hair? Beyond the veneer of each object is an underworld, and my grandfather is nothing if not investigator. In the years of his health's decline, my grandfather has become accustomed to the visits of Yakov the technician, the boy whose profile appears in portraiture. He's the muse with deft fingers, the apprentice with a knack for Rube Goldberg devices. Yakov's pulleys and cords span my grandfather's rooms in an unwieldy matrix. Apart from my grandfather, only Yakov can navigate the floor of the study without triggering the delivery of Coptic-bound texts and eggs on a tray. Yakov is nearsighted, nearly blind. Yakov understands the camera's mechanisms with an eye inches from the focus switch. Tonight, my grandfather does not wait for Yakov. History will swallow the fragile whole. The refrain begins in homophony, echoing against the walls of the study. The transistor radio is shaking. Strings, woodwinds, brass, flutes, piccolos, terraced, grow louder. The walls are trembling. My grandfather looks into the deeps of his eyes and begins to conduct with his hands. He moves his fingers briskly through the air, ceiling to floor, window to window, as if drawing the sound, ever more booming, from the tiny machine and into the room. His eyes are wild, his lips moist. A voice rips through the air, a baritone, deep and sonorous. O Freund nicht dies Turne, I'm sorry for my German. Continuing to conduct, left hand flying, my grandfather pulls a tweed jacket from the wall, draping it over his laboratory coat. A soprano joins, an octave higher, shrill, more. Sondern last, she sings, ins angenehm mir anstimmen. I can't speak German. She sings, the glass of each camera vibrating, und Freundin wohler. My grandfather's left hand is a blur. The shadows at the window are quickening, as if my grandfather's study were at the center of a centrifuge. Tochter aus Elysium, the chorus sings, the orchestra joining, the orchestra roaring. Bier betreten Fürtrunken, the chorus sings, holding the note beneath the cadenza, the sharp, the unresolved, for longer than a single shared breath should expel, for a swollen, quaking measure of time. Sound tumbles forth from the transistor radio. And then quiet. That sliver of quiet just before the next movement. My grandfather, Dr. Roman Vishniak, draws a walking cane from beneath his desk and opens the door. Gray wind and silence rush in to flatten the prints against the wall, to sap the color from the map on the desk and from the photographs of my mother. Everything changes and nothing moves. Dr. Roman Vishniak, biologist, photographer, inventor, and collector, disappears into the night and is never seen again. So I think I'm probably just about out of time, so I will not read all of this, but let me see, a couple more snippets. Soon after, far away, I am born to his youngest child, Maya, who inherits violet-flecked eyes. My mother hardly speaks of Dr. Roman Vishniak, though our house is lined with editions of a vanished world. I am quietly, fervently infatuated. My grandfather inhabits only image and imagination. That is, until my mother begins to die. This is not the story of my mother's death. As her hair falls out in patches, so too fall memories, and I collect them as I will later collect the objects of my grandfather's migration. So often does the detritus of a life of intersecting histories amass like hair, and we are left to palm each strand as if disparate or chronological, some sequence would spell an explanation for the loss. At the university, I trained in museum science, specializing in translational taxidermy. I work beneath Professor Yakov Kassel, premier scholar of mid-century inventors. It takes little time to learn that Kassel knew my grandfather. In this setting, I come to know my grandfather as a collector, begin to trace him. From his birth in Pavlovsk to the Wilmersdorf photo processing lab in Berlin, from his household in Paris to internment in the Camp du Rouchard in Clichy, from the Lisbon border to the SS Siboney to the unreal city into which he dissolves. I trace after my grandfather up and down the slope of time. How else would I find him, know him, summon him, tracing his undeveloped negatives, tracing his closeted inventions, unearthing the poetry of his science, the poetry of his angel of history, beginning at the end and beginning. Prince Kropotkin's pocket watch, held in the Museum of Failed Objects, from the New York collection. This gold-inlaid timepiece was crafted for Prince Pyotr Alexandrovich Kropotkin on December 8, 1842, one day before his birth in Moscow. Heart clock is engraved in the script along the watch's edge, likely a reference to Galileo Galilei's pulsologium, a small pendulum used to measure the pulse of an infant. Prince Kropotkin carried this watch on his person for the entirety of his life, most notably tucking it into his beard before exploring Finland's glacial deposits on a Russian Geographical Society expedition. Watch left is shown without Lenin's steel-forged chain, which is presently held at the headquarters of the International Society for the Destruction of Information. Several days after Kropotkin died of pneumonia, Vladimir Lenin forged a weighted steel chain for the watch. 1 year later, Prince Kropotkin's pocket watch was adopted as the official emblem of the International Society for the Destruction of Information, whose flag bears the phrase, "Everything is relative." Time doesn't exist, Dr. Roman Vishniak cries to a Time journalist, flinging his hands in the air. As if in response, the timepiece arrives at Vishniak's doorstep on the 60th anniversary of the October Revolution, wrapped in stained linen. Prince Kropotkin's pocket watch has traveled the hands of many notable political figures, including Felix Zeberdy, Jean Longuet, and Joseph Conrad. It is not known who or what delivered the pocket watch to Dr. Roman Vishniak's stoop, though some speculate a plot to induct Vishniak into the International Society for the Destruction of Information. Vishniak is never inducted into the society. He hangs the pocket watch from a door handle. It swings mischievously when he, or anyone, enters the laboratory. In the final decade before his disappearance, Vishniac is known on trains to recite Einstein's theory of relativity to strangers without provocation. Okay, two more things. In the Unreal City, Professor Jakob Castle and I walked to the archives. We lived by the river, miles north of the museum district. Each morning, we awake to the sounds of fishermen docking, to clanging port bells, to the sense of salt and commerce. This is where we begin. Professor Jakob Castle was always there, studying in my grandfather's shadow. I've arrived a secondary, a sidekick, though this compilation is an inheritance. The air sticks to our skin at dawn. We walk along the riverbank until we reach the dam, the overlook, where the dirt footpath stutters into concrete. This path leads through the university district and into the museum district. Statues of old men stand, crouch, and gather in every stately courtyard, among trees and topiaries. We walk beneath bronzed colonial noses. They guide us towards history. Everywhere suits. The city unfolds into mourning, and briefcases emerge, filling sidewalks and bike lanes. We brush shoulders with the city's interpreters, with the city's businessmen, with the city's forgotten, with the city's ghosts of presidents as they step from antiseptic gutters. We walk to the archives, and the sun limns high-rises, stacked embassies, the pin and brick of the city center as we draw nearer to the collections. Professor Jakob Castle's shirt is transparent with sweat. It is as if, walking along the path to the archives, we are walking along the surface of my grandfather's body, his skin stretched along the points of the city's grid. Though we study my grandfather's holdings, it is the fabric of the unreal city that holds my grandfather's whole. In the mirrored sheen of laboratory windows, we search for the softs of his fingertips. So this last snippet is called Skin, and it's from the Under the Chromatin series. Medium, chromogenic print, paper 11 by 4 inches, mount 16 by 20 inches, location unknown. To the naked eye, what should I do for this? Okay. To the naked eye, held in your palm, it could be a moth's wingtip or soap residue, slit from the tip of the papillary ridge. Man's vision is purely a matter of reflected light, I said. Show me, you say. In the desk is a letter opener. Laughing, your mouth slack. It is an autumn morning. My hand is wrinkled. An old hand. I cut a sliver and give it to you, an offering. Look, I say. Look at me. I'm no exhibitionist. I am just a man with a thumb, a left thumb. And it is an autumn morning, and the microscopes sit in a row. You drop the flake on a slide, plunge the slide into the microaquarium, incidental luster at your chin, adjust the body, rack and pinion, the objective immersed in depth, the eyepiece at your lashes, 2 mirrors, everything is protoplasm, eddying, projected onto a screen. Parts of me are like amoeba, turbid, I reassure myself, handing you the lake. Ordinary light vibrates in all directions at once, yet through a prism it vibrates in one. One what? One direction. Metallurgists sent light through translucent slices of metal, evaluating crystalline frameworks. It's like starry night, you say. Polarized light, I say. Protoplasm, I say. You lead me to the dark room, skin turbid, a high index of refraction. You must fill the body with fluid. The image will crystallize. Inscribed, skin 280X, written on LL of paper and mount, recto. Human skin, finger, my finger, RV, written in pencil on mount, verso. NS, written in pencil on mount, verso. 47, written on a sticker on mount, verso. Thanks.